This is Remnant Wire with Shannon and Adams. Today we begin our conversation with Dr. Alana Arguello about yoga, Eastern mysticism, and the spiritual dangers they pose. Let's listen.
Hi, and welcome to Remnant Wire Radio. I'm your host, Shannon and Adams, and I am super excited about this interview that I have for you today. As you know, if you've been listening, we've been going through spiritual warfare from the very beginning to the very end, discussing how the enemy attacks us, whether it be through weaknesses, trauma, history. Maybe there's open doors that we leave for the enemy to creep in and attach to us and cause complete and utter destruction in our lives. And sometimes we're none the wiser. And in other times, we totally submit and give in to the spiritual warfare in our lives, feeling completely helpless and not understanding the weapons of our warfare and the strength that we have in Jesus Christ. But through our process of going through spiritual warfare, I have led you through the power and the Spirit of God, through recognizing all of the ways that the enemy tries to attack and giving practical tools to overcome. In those specific broadcasts, we talked about different open doors and things that the church allows to creep into our life, and maybe even things that you and I have both done that we didn't realize were either forms of idol worship or sorcery, things that maybe we need to repent from, and we need to close those doors in our life. And today's interview, we are going to be going over one of the hottest topics and one of my biggest passions, and that is discussing yoga. But we're going to be unearthing yoga's ancient roots, specifically with Alana Arguello, I'm sorry, it's a very hard name for me to pronounce, who wrote an amazing book that was actually forwarded by Ron Rhodes. Many of you might know him. He's an apologist, the president of Reasoning from the Scriptures Ministries. She's an amazing author. I've been going through her book specifically, even with my husband, and she's exposing sorcery and its transcultural reach from the beginning to the end. Now, this book is not just something we're plugging to plug. It is a resource. So anybody who is questioning, who needs fact, who wants to go back to the original documentation and look at all of the history, this book compiles it all. And I'm so blessed to have her on this program. Alana, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Shannon.
Super excited to have you on. I've been waiting for this moment for a while. And as you know, we've had a little bit of spiritual warfare to even get this specific broadcast going. So I know the Lord is in it, and it's going to fall on the ears of whom the Lord wants it to fall on. Let's talk a little bit. Give me a little background to you. You're so amazing. I can't even quantify your skills, your abilities, and even this book and what the Lord has put on your heart. So let the listeners know a little bit about you.
Well, thank you. You're kind. This is just what the Lord has been doing, and I've seen. We always look back on our life retrospectively, right? And we can see God's hand that He's just been guiding us, and even things where we've been messy, right? Like how He can turn things for His purposes if we let Him. So that's sort of my testimony. I won't give all my testimony here. It's a little bit lengthy, but I did know that Jesus was real when I was young, and I ended up turning from Him. I started associating life circumstances and even some hypocrisy that I saw in the church, and I turned against God, and I grew estranged from Him and really angry at Him. And at first, I wanted to disprove His existence. And that didn't work. And I was doing it academically. I was doing it in college. I was studying. And of course, there's plenty of evidence that Jesus walked the earth, that He was buried, He died, He was buried, even bodily resurrection evidence, right, of Jesus. So then I suspected, well, He must be in all other religions. So it must be the same God, just manifesting in different forms in religions. And so I started studying religions, actually studying them, the text, reading religious text. I traveled to Asia, studied in Asia, and I got into their philosophies, and I realized that Jesus wasn't in there. It was clearly different. The philosophies and the religious systems were very different from what I understood studying Jesus. And even when I looked at scriptures with Jesus, I was more looking at it from an academic standpoint, if you would. So I didn't have, it wasn't illuminated by the Holy Spirit, right? It was just looking all I could find the truth that God was real and this made sense and, all of this. And then I knew that the other religions were different. Somewhere in all of that, I had moved to Los Angeles, and I was working mostly with gang-associated families in East Los Angeles, and I saw a lot of violence going on. And I did street work, so I was boots on the ground. So I was in the homes and in the schools and on streets. And so I ended up just getting really depleted. And I thought, I need it. And I was experimenting with a lot of religions, a lot of shamanistic practices, really occult sorcery based. Moved from studying it to trying to experience, like trying to delve in and actually practice some of them. And it still was all coming up empty. And I was this just big mix of everything, different philosophies, different practices. I guess what people would call as new age, right? Yeah. So just this mix. And I ended up thinking I needed to pick a religion. So I mini mode of all the religions I'd studied. And I picked a sect of Mahayana Buddhism called Nichiren Buddhism. And I started practicing through Soka Gakkai International. I became devout. I had a gohanzen. I got very serious and I committed to that religion. And I moved from there to San Diego, and it was there that the Lord stopped me. Wow. Literally stopped me. So I turned to the true God, true Lord of the Bible, and I started studying the Bible, completely gave my life to Him. I renounced all the things I was repented, turned to Him, and this was before I met my husband, and I was staying home and I was just studying the Bible. If I wasn't working, I was home studying the Bible. That Bible I had to rebound it.
Oh yeah, I have one of those.
Because I was just immersed and thirsty for the Word, and the Lord was washing me, right? And I was, and a couple of years in, I met my husband, and it was my husband that really saw me teaching and thought I should start writing, and he helped me with that. And I was teaching at a local Christian college, and I had adult students, and they were I was teaching world religions and values and ethics. And there were students from Southern California, all different sorts of churches, different denominations, different churches. And my students were coming to me, and they were asking questions and even sharing books or something they heard from a pastor, and again, different churches across Southern California. And I thought, these are things that I was into when I was in the occult. Like, why is this in a, quote, conservative evangelical church? This wasn't making sense to me. Like, what is this doing here? And my husband served in the military, and we ended up moving, and we moved several times. And so we were boots on the ground in different states and in different areas. And I thought, it's just this stuff that we would say is the apostasy, right? Yeah. The fall away, these things that are in the church. And I thought, it's just because it's in Southern California.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
It's because it's in California. So we went to conservative red states, and we thought, we're going to have so many churches to choose from. And we would go try churches. And we were shocked at what we were seeing inside these churches that said they believe the Bible's without error.
Yeah.
And so, and that we could talk probably all day.
Oh yeah. Tell me about it.
And the different states. And so it just really, and then the more you study the Word and you understand, the end times and what the church is going towards, and just seeing it more and more. And then the Lord was doing a lot of work on me, because I was really at first a little bit upset. How could they do this? Yeah. I know I actually had, even though I knew I was forgiven, I had regret because of everything that I was in, all the darkness. And because once you know the light, and you're in His light, you have the truth.
Yeah.
I can't believe I wasted all that time, right? And then, but as you read the scriptures, the Lord says that He doesn't waste time.
Yeah.
And I realized that the first time you and I met, I shared with you that he not only redeemed my soul, but I realized when he started showing me what was in the church, he was redeeming my past.
Yeah.
All of a sudden, it wasn't just that I had experienced these different things. I knew what their sacred text said. I knew I was in even the liberal, very, very liberal world and the very lost world. Like, I saw those things. I knew how they thought. And so some of it's been very helpful, even continuing to live in California, that just for one-on-one apologetics, when I meet someone at the dog park or something, it definitely helps because I know why they're thinking what they're thinking. So those are the things I used to think.
Yeah.
So the Lord, has used that. And then he kept pressing on me more and more about the realization of about the apostasy and the confusion. And I think some of that too, I think the mindset, the Lord knows what he does. And my husband and I go well, I think, together just with our thinking. My background's very analytical thinking. And my husband served with the Special Forces. He was in the SEAL teams. And he also noticed, with the apostasy and how the enemy works and a lot of things, what you talk on your program, right?
Yeah.
How the discern deceiving and how do you discern that? And it was my husband that really led me to, regarding about two things about yoga, specifically the reactions that I get from when I say Christians can't practice yoga without being in idolatry, sorcery, right? The reactions that I get are, sometimes I have women, I would say there's three reactions. Sometimes I've seen women tear up and they already knew. I didn't do anything but validate what the Holy Spirit was already telling them.
Yeah.
The Lord was already putting on them, you shouldn't be doing this anymore. And those are beautiful moments and shared moments. I've even had generational witches come up to me after a conference saying that they were just so alone because they thought, why is the church doing these practices?
Yeah, wow.
Including yoga, right? So really sweet and beautiful moments with that. And we realize that what the Lord's doing when your heart is yielded, that you only want him and his truth, he will confirm it in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses for you. And so to help you discern, even if you don't have all the background with the academia of these subjects, the Lord will lead if your heart is truly yielded to only wanting him and being willing to let go of things that you might think you love, and being open to that. So the Lord, with my husband, with yoga, again, what he was telling me that I was noticing and he noticed was the reaction. So those were the beautiful, sweet moments. The other reactions that I got were, oh, that's just a gray area. Yeah. You don't need to worry about that. Even people that didn't practice yoga, they say that's a gray, like that. Don't worry about that. We don't need to talk about that. That'll divide the church. And then the other reactions that I would get were angry, like very, very upset. My husband used the word, like, sometimes he thought women wanted to assault me.
Wow. Oh, I know. They get passionate about it. Let me tell you.
Yes. And and then my husband pointed out, he said that if he was looking for an enemy territory, or looking for an enemy, like a sniper, those are two of the areas you look. You look at where people are really upset and don't want you to look in that position, but then you also look where people are saying there's nothing over there. Mm-hmm. Like it's no big deal. So this sort of started, I want to dig a little bit deeper. And then there was also things that I noticed as well when people would talk about the apostasy. I'd hear wonderful contenders of the faith. There's so many, and I talk about this in the book too. Yeah. There's been contenders of the truth since the church was born, and they are usually far and few between. There are remnants that get ignored, and then church is doing it. So the big question, even with your listeners, are you going to listen to the ones that have been in this, that the Lord has called to this, or are you going to just reject it and move with the broader path?
You need to have ears to hear what's about to be said and receive it openly and let the Spirit move through the information that you get.
Yes, exactly. So So what I started to see is I'd hear these wonderful contenders of the truth, and they'd be called to certain areas. So I'd hear some talking about like physical yoga, right? Like gym yoga. Or then I hear people talking about word of faith, like prosperity gospel. And then I hear people talk about something else, like drunk in the spirit or something. Or then you hear people talk about contemplative prayer, right? Like the meditation type prayer. All these different astrology, new age, and these things. And it's wonderful work. But one of the things that, from really being heavy in it and being on the side of reading the text and the books and being over there, is that the piece that hopefully my contribution with this for people to understand is all of those things are yoga. And they're some form of yoga, or they're the product of yoga practice. And so, and yoga at its basic is mind, body, word, magic. Yoga is an idea, and people think of, because that's actually a popular, it's in the book, where people say, what's your practice with yoga? What's your kind? What's your practice? Well, yoga is actually not a practice. When people talk about practice, they're talking about yoga kara. And that's not to be confused. I say this in one of my footnotes. I try to be precise. There is a Yogacara school of Buddhism. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about Yogacara in general, is the practices of yoga is an idea based in a philosophical framework and a philosophy that produces practices. And the best way that you can think of this is and this would make sense when we try to understand the Bible from the beginning to the end. And then if you think about it this way, I've used different ways to explain this, but you can say, for example, with detergent, go down to a detergent aisle and you think that you have a detergent to choose from. But really, if you look at it, the ingredients are the same. And if you look even closer, most likely the company's the same. It's just subsidiaries of a different, right? Or also when you're sold things, like you go to the store and you buy a healthy, quote, granola bar, right? It says healthy, so it must be healthy, right? But you look in the back and you think, what are these ingredients, right? Like, really understand. And those ingredients are in the same things that are unhealthy. Right? So it's like, what is this? So it's the same ingredients from the same source. It's just a match. Or as you saw in the book, it's a pagan paper doll. Like if you think the paper doll, the paper doll's the same, and you just mismatch the outfits. Is what in the root, that pagan doll is yoga. And that's where people think that, because we've been, and we were targeted to think this way, but yoga is, people think yoga is that's just gym yoga. It's very difficult for them to get their mind around it. That no, when you're talking about, we do mantra worship in the music, some of the music groups that are situated in churches that have a false gospel, by the way. They have a gospel and we pay for their music. And they have occult symbols all over, what do you call the album covers? Or
that is it. We can go into a broadcast about that alone. Symbolism. You guys are going to be in for it, because we're going to have a couple of these interviews, because we can go on that for days alone.
Yes, it's there, right? It's the devil can't hide. He's the father of lies, right? You look closer, you can see things. And if you have that, I came out of these things, so I can see some of those things. But also with the music, right? The mantras, they're doing mantras. They're repeating words. If you start repeating a phrase in a song more than a few times, right? I'm not saying there's not a creative license there with some of that, but when you're repeating it, that is mantra. And mantra, some people understand mantra means repetition, right? That this is a pagan form of worship. But what they don't understand about mantra is mantra in the Sanskrit actually means to cast a spell. And the other piece of that is that doing mantras actually can change your brain. And that's one of the things that I go over in the book too, is how yoga is actually changing your brain. So it gives a whole other perspective when God says that it will ensnare you. He tells Israel over and over again, the pagan worship will ensnare you. And now we know, because of archaeology, these cultures and what way they were practicing, it's getting dug up where we actually know what they were practicing. And to say that has nothing to do today, no, it's just redressed in contemporary clothes.
So let's pack that up, because you just unloaded so much, and I want to recap it, because essentially yoga, let's get it out of our mind, listeners, that yoga is just a practice, right? Because that's what you're specifically saying, that it is not just a practice, it is an ideology. It has crept in to the way that we act, worship, perform, live in almost in every single facet of society. And that this is a spiritual demonic hold that has occurred from the beginning of time to now to change our way of thinking, and even the way that we live and we address circumstances and situations, and even the way that we perceive our own relationship, worship, and intimacy with Jesus. And from what I gathered just from that bit of your introduction, it is so woven in that unless we expose it, and we, as your book is titled, you're unearthing it, you are going to be subject to it almost consuming you, taking over you as a believer, not even knowing, not even being able to separate or categorize the good from the bad from the ugly, in some of the things that we've ritualistically almost been brainwashed into believing.
Correct. And because we think it's done in the church, and it's done by even our pastors have accepted certain things, even if the pastor intends well or is even in truth, right? It's coming in different forms. If it's not from the worship, it's coming through the children's ministry or the women's ministry. And it is, I think one of the things for people to understand, my undergrad was in philosophy with a concentration and focus on East Asian studies and a minor poli-sci. And then I did a marriage family therapy master's and my doctorate's in apologetics. So I have and my doctorate is in classical apologetics. So there's a lot of philosophy based in that, and bad philosophy, how bad philosophy becomes bad theology, right? Yeah. So I have a philosophy background. And one of the things that I think that people don't understand regarding philosophy is they think, well, and this is what happens with yoga, well, I'm not doing mantra worship, or I'm not doing any form of yoga. There's people that can say that they literally are not doing any form. Some of it, I would like to know what their daily life looks like and what their worship looks like, because sometimes they are and they didn't realize it, kind of speaking to what you just mentioned. But there's because that's deception.
That's deception. That's the enemy. That's his playing field.
Because you don't know, because it's not called to that. Just like, you don't know that the ingredients are bad in the granola bar because it says healthy. So you think you're doing something healthy, right? That's just, we also think it's done science-based, right? When it's not, right? And that's another, if you want to talk about that later, the multi-billion-dollar industry of yoga. But also how it was targeted. The book goes into that. Specifically contemplative Raja yoga, which is also part of the mantra worship that you see in the music, was actually targeted. The elite occult specifically said that type of yoga was what they were going to use the church. We have their documentation that they said this. So, and it's worked. Because you see it even in churches that maybe aren't accepting physical yoga, like gem yoga, hatha yoga, they're doing contemplative yoga, and they're just not calling it yoga. But the problem about philosophy is even if people say they're not doing any yoga at all, people will say, well, the philosophy is not impacting me. Like yoga philosophy is not impacting me. Well, one, they don't understand what yoga philosophy is, but it's which, the book goes into what it has to do with goddess worship, earth worship, as well as transgender. All of this is yoga philosophy. So understanding what yoga philosophy is important, but also to not forget, and Paul warned about the philosophy and the empty deceit, even when you're studying the scriptures, even about the elemental spirits, right? These things that pagan worship are based in pagan philosophy, because the pagan religion you don't extract philosophy from the religion or the practices. They're linked. Mm-hmm. But philosophy, the best example I can give, and parents might understand this a little bit, is if their kids are going to school, their kids will come back and you'll hear them say something out of the culture. We hear the word meme, right? Mm-hmm. The pictures, little memes. Well, memes is based off of the philosophical idea, the law of memetics. It's culturally transferred ideas. So people you'll hear kids today say things. I hear kids, I've heard kids literally quote Nietzsche or Schopenhauer, but they weren't reading Nietzsche or Schopenhauer. They have no idea that they just quoted them, right? But parents will know that, that there's no truth, right? Or there's many truths, mm-hmm. or the pragmatism, right? That, well, it's not working for me, so I'm going to do this, right? And mm-hmm. so, but parents hear their kids and they say, no, there is truth. There is absolute truth, right? A Christian parent's going to they know that the kids are hearing this. Well, where are they hearing it? And because it's in the culture. Yeah. But they read any of the writers of relativism or the postmodernist or the pluralist, right? Or any of the pragmatists. So there's several different areas within pragmatism itself. But the kids aren't at school reading, any of them, right? But they're imprinted. Their brains are being tempted toward the philosophy. So it's the same thing when people say, well, I'm not practicing any yoga, and yoga philosophy doesn't impact my family. That's error. And evolution, for example, is yoga philosophy. Mm. And it's the same thing when people say, oh, evolution doesn't have anything to do with me because we don't teach evolution and my kids don't believe in that. It's not true. If they're practicing yoga at school, they just bought into the evolution.
Well, and that's something you just brought up that is really interesting, because a lot of parents don't even realize that these forms of Eastern mysticism have crept into schools and even the way that the school chooses to educate the child. And I'm not going to say, I want to say the word Montessori school system, but not Montessori specifically, but we all know that they have a way of teaching children how to be independent and, to help themselves. And there's a way that they discipline, and there's a way that they encourage, and that there's a way that they use tactile function and all of these things. But there's a style of teaching which has ingrained this philosophy, which almost leads what they say is self-esteem, but it's really self-worship. So it is a brainwashing, not only just in the culture we see, that is obviously part of the culture of the school system, but it is going into the forms of education from a very basic pre-K kindergarten level, where it's a form of self-worship. It's a form of self-esteem. It's understanding your own reality and being okay with your reality and almost accepting your limitations without regard. And the feminist and the declassification of even gender that occurs by the simplification of categorizing children by animal names and sectors, like, hey, this group's the blue penguins, this group's the white elephants, and not referring to them by their gender. All of this is in our education systems and even in private Christian schools. And this all goes back to that philosophy, those ideologies, those cultural teachings that have stemmed from paganism that has crept into society, and literally we are none the wiser because we're taught, even as parents, oh no, you want your child to be self-propelled. You want them to have a self-esteem. No one's saying self-esteem is bad. So please, as I go on this rabbit trail, don't say that I'm saying self-esteem in a spiritual, biblical sense is good. Knowing who you were created in Christ Jesus and understanding that being created in his image. I'm talking about the ideologies of self-worship through self-esteem. So this is something that's happening more and more and more. They're also doing meditation times instead of nap time. They're doing reflecting times. They're putting on certain musics with certain frequencies to calm kids' minds that have ADHD or that have Asperger's or that are suffering from other disorders. And they're using Eastern mysticism as a medication, not just a educational foundation. And again, here we are saying, oh, well, I mean, my kid is so much more peaceful, and playing that music and dimming the lights and burning that incense has really helped them. I'm seeing less, of this at home or less of that at home. But we're almost handing our children over to the slaughter in that regard. And I know I went on a children-parent tangent here, but I just want everyone to realize that it's in every facet of life.
Well, right, and because and the technology has a similar effect. Technology and drugs and yoga actually have similar effects. So the meditation, the kids are calmer because they go into more of a trance type state. So they're actually also more impacted. So that's why it's very dangerous when you go to a church and a church is done. We witnessed a youth group once. Over 100 times said, "Let it rain," and then we witnessed the youth, over 100 youth in front of us, go into convulsing, and they were just literally in this trance. But maybe you don't see it to that extreme. Maybe you'll start to see it now. I mean, we've also witnessed people start repeating the words. And then they don't even hear that the worship leader just said that they can manifest the Creator. So we're
yeah,
and then they can that's interesting. I'm not sure how you do that, but then but during that time, my husband actually went in that church when we were at. My husband said, "Do you hear that hissing?"
Mm-hmm.
Is behind us. That's why, because it's coming out of this woman, right? Because it was, and this was a conservative. This was a Baptist church. So conservative Baptist. So it's in all denominations. So I don't mean to just point out anything. And it's not in all. Let me rephrase that. The apostasy is 11, right? It's not a gold fixed on one side. It's everywhere. But that doesn't mean every denomination, a specific church within the denomination has it, right? So because one of that church denomination doesn't mean another one has it, right? So that doesn't work that way. And to say that, my denomination has nothing, that's not true either.
I'm non-denominational, girl, and let me tell you, it is in even some of the best quote unquote Bible teaching, line by line, verse by verse churches out there, and that's why we're exposing it today.
Exactly. So, the other we were talking about the yoga, the declassification, and all of that, but it allows people to be moldable. And so, actually, some of I talk about in the book, try to cite everything so people can look, that because we're in an age of bad information, right? False information. Right. And people, sometimes you read things and it's like, where did they get that? They just said something and it might not be true. So this is why I took the time to do this and provide the research for people that are interested and want to know, so that they know where it's coming from, that this is actual research. But when you talk about the Eastern worldview, that's also a mistake. And I've said this in other interviews, but that people think that yoga came out of Hinduism, and that is error. It was yoga that birthed Hinduism. Yoga is older, and yoga is from the ancient world. The different forms of it, again, there's more forms than just, we have to remove from our mind that it's only physical, right? But it's from the ancient world, and we know that in archaeology. And people say, well, it's not in the Bible. And it's not true, because the people that are talked about in the Bible that are the pagan worshipers, we now know what they were practicing. This is why Hitler was so interested in the Hittites. Yeah. He was interested in Hittites because the Hittites had Vedic gods, right? Pre-Vedic gods that, they were Vedic, but it was pre-Vedic time period. And so this was, and we now know more evidence about Genesis 11, right? That this was the Tower of Babel, and then it spread out. And so, and it came from all different, it spread throughout cultures across time, and then it just mixes. People pick up things that they want here, they pick up a couple practice here, they drop a couple practices, and then it just mixes all over. But again, the ideology is the same. The ideas are the same. So this is when you say Eastern worldview, yes, it's Eastern. It's also, Egypt shared in these worldviews, and it's just all what we're seeing the world globally come together, right? And that we're seeing them come together and united under a similar worldview and then the similar practices. I think people confuse that sometimes about, they think that there's going to be just this one set God and one set practice. The end times is going to be multiple practices. Like I point this out in the book, the Antichrist, to say namaste, which means, I bow to the God in you. It's a command, actually, as will bow to the God in me. So people love to hear that they're little gods.
Oh, yeah.
But that they also, at the same time, so it's self-worship, but at the same time denying self, because everybody's one, because it's all God.
It's the coexist movement packaged on a global scale in a form during the end times that I think none of us could actually mentally fathom. And you're right. People think that the Antichrist, specifically because it says he's going to come from the East, is going to have one ideology, one religion. And we think of one religion as just one faith understanding. But that's not going to be the case. It's going to be ecumenicalism, essentially, minus Christianity.
That it's all God.
That's right.
If the Antichrist is saying, look, and I can show you the better way, the way to become a stronger God. Like he will be the ultimate God, right? Like, so, and then people will go for that. So it's essentially a cult is what you're doing, is that because it's creating, and this is yoga philosophy, that you have to deny that you are fearfully and wonderfully made.
Yeah.
You are not unique in that way. We're all together. We're all one. But we're all one God. So that's both this, you're self-worshiping, but you're also worshiping things, the trees, animals, because it's all one. So when you talked about the different groups, right, and the different labels, it's because it's all one.
Yeah.
It's a way to start dismantling the idea, which is, again, yoga philosophy. I break it down in details and what it means in the Sanskrit, what it actually means, but that it's breaking down that individual identity. Because you're not fearfully and wonderfully made. However, you're all God. So all God, but all God needs to know how to grow stronger, right, to create. So you need one strong God that shows how you all can be like me. And this is cult mentality. And we see it starting to form, but it's also, I mentioned, Germany and what I have some chapters on that, on Germany and what this has to do with Hitler and his officers and how they used the Bhagavad Gita and yoga and then of course how we were targeted with this, and we drank the Kool-Aid, literally.
Oh, well, I mean, people think that Hitler just made the swastika, right? That was just something that the Germans decided to draw and use as an emblem for themselves, not understanding that he was heavily, like you said, involved in witchcraft and sorcery and rituals and paganism and occult and magic and ancient cults.
Well, yeah, and the swastika is ancient. It is actually Eastern. It's ancient Jan, which Jan is transtheism. I wrote an article, an academic article about that. I believe we're moving from panentheism to transtheism, but in Jan, culture's getting very, we've unpacked, some of that's in the book too, how we've unpacked how far back it goes, but that is yoga. The Jans practice different forms of yoga. And so yes, that's why Hitler and his people want to, we cookie cutter things, right? We tiptoe around different things. And we say, well, oh yeah, he was into occult stuff and he was into sorcery and he was into different things, but he was into Eastern esoteric. The bottom line is he was into yoga philosophy and into the practices of yoga, including hatha yoga. And again, we know we have this information. It's just sometimes we don't want to look at it. And it's not us, Shannon. Yeah. It's not, excuse me, it's not the rest of the world.
Yeah.
The world knows what yoga is. If you go to Yoga Journal, they will talk about how it has the same impact. That's why you do shrooms with it, right? Shrooms have the same impact.
Or aswaka, right? Anything like that.
Goddess worship, it's all there.
Yeah.
To not have bias, I document very secular, non-believing Indic philosophers and yoga scholars that can tell you, that flat out tell you that even yoga at its root in the word means trick and fraud.
Yeah.
That yogis were sorcerers.
Mm-hmm.
And know this historically. It's unfortunately, it's the church.
Yeah.
It says, no. It doesn't mean that for me. I don't want it to mean that for me. And which is pragmatism.
You hit it on the head right there. What you just said, I don't think that is so powerful. You just said the church says, well, that's not what it means to me, or I don't want it to mean that for me. So dangerous, those words, yet so true. We justify things because we enjoy it in our flesh. And so we spiritually put a justification around it. And then we end up falling into these patterns, and we become blind to our sin and blind to the idolatry. And we have literally given ourselves over to the pagan ritualistic idol worship in many forms and fashions. People don't get it. And I'm so glad we're going back to the roots of this, because everyone needs to understand yoga is not just stretching. Yes, there's different positions. We're going to get into that a little bit later in the second part of this interview, but it's not just positions and the Kundalini spirit and opening up your chakras and all of these different things from the physical, quote unquote, stretching. And I've walked out of churches that have had, yoga Mondays for, postpartum moms. And they're like, oh, but I don't know why you're upset, Shannon. I mean, that's not what it means to us. We have Christian music in the background. And I'm like,
and Shannon, you're, and so this is quite a challenge. And so I hope your listeners, so brace yourself.
Yeah.
But I'm about to
strap on your seatbelts, ladies and gentlemen.
What we really we have to be honest with ourselves. We have to examine ourselves and use our minds here. When we say regarding pagan worship and yoga, well, no, that doesn't mean that for me. I don't want it to mean that, so therefore it doesn't mean that, right? What we have done right there, that is the same philosophy that transgender ideology can justify. No, I'm not a boy. I don't want to be a boy. It doesn't mean that for me.
Preach it.
The same thing. And so when we sit there, that is a demonic doctrine.
That's right.
And that demonic doctrine is based out of yoga philosophy, and it is changing our culture. It is changing our kids. And here's the big kicker. People think that yoga meditation is about changing your mind. That is not, it's about emptying your mind. That's actually not true. It's about changing. The goal of yoga is to change your worldview. And that goes into people not understanding magic, witchcraft, and sorcery. Magic is when you do a practice of magic. And that practice is based off of, right? Pagan worship is created for a pagan god. It cannot fit with how the biblically revealed creator, how we know of him and his attributes and his nature. It's going to be contradictory to that. So the magic practice can be isolated. You can practice one practice of magic, right? One thing. But the more that you practice it, the practices change your mind. And then comes witchcraft. It crafts and bends your mind into a world view. So now you start seeing the world differently. You think of things differently. And then this is getting conformed to the world, right? What Paul warned us about, the witchcraft. Then it becomes sorcery when you realize, wow, I need to step it up. I want to get even better at what I'm doing. And now you need a teacher.
Yeah.
The second you need a teacher, a guru, now it's become that those are your sorcerers. Those are those difference with those words. It's a progression of changing and bending your mind, again, setting you up for that antichrist, for a cult mentality, setting you up to a worldview that will fit within it. And then you're this little God, and then you're focused in on Antichrist as your leader.
Thanks for listening to Remnant Wire Radio. If you'd like to go back and hear previous episodes of the show, visit remnantwireradio.com. And while you're there, please prayerfully consider supporting our Genesis campaign. We're raising money to continue operation of the website, podcast, and our soon-to-be-launched mobile app. To give, visit remnantwireradio.com.